Hey, how's it going guys? It's Nate here. Though, hopefully you know that by now. Anyway, Skyrim's such a mammoth-sized game that, despite approaching her 8th birthday this year, many of us still have much to learn about this chilly northernmost province of Tamriel. Indeed, The Elder Scrolls V is so buried with Easter eggs, hidden secrets, and other humorous references that, even today, it's still possible to find yourself pleasantly surprised by something you hadn't seen before on your previous travels. So today, we will once more be diving in to yet another 10 tiny details you may still have missed in The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Part 43! Starting off, midway into the Dark Brotherhood questline, the guild is given a contract to assassinate Titus Mede II, Emperor of Tamriel. An exciting feat that'll dictate the remainder of the faction's storyline. Standing in our way, other than the Emperor of course, who for obvious reasons would rather not be assassinated, is the Penitus Oculatus, his secretive order of elite bodyguards. Leading the Oculatus is a man named Commander Morrow. He quickly becomes the main antagonist to our efforts, constantly attempting to foil our plans, and he even comes close to destroying the Brotherhood entirely. Well, what you may not have known is that Morrow, ironically enough, actually seems to be the descendant of a man who was himself involved in a plot to assassinate another emperor just a few hundred years ago. You see, back in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, we could learn of a secret society of Imperial soldiers who planned to kill the Emperor, at the time Uriel Septim III, during one of his upcoming visits to Vardenfell, and install one of his sons to the throne instead. This group of treacherous legionnaires called themselves the Talos Cult, and the player would be sent to stop such a horrific plot before it could be executed. One of the leading members of this cult was a soldier by the name of Oritius Morrow. Long story short, we would have to murder Oritius to death in order to complete the quest. But nonetheless, in a hilarious twist of fate, it seems the man most dedicated to the Emperor's protection in The Elder Scrolls V descends from, or at least was in some way related to, one of those who was most bent on doing the exact opposite just a few short centuries prior. Next on our list, during Skyrim's opening sequence, after you disembark from the prison carriages, an Imperial soldier called Hadvar will ask for your name, prompting the player to begin character creation. After you've finished, he'll indeed make a comment based upon whichever race you selected. So if you're a Nord, Hadvar will say something along the lines of, well, at least you'll die in your homeland. Or if you're a fellow Imperial, he'll comment on just how far away you are from Cyrodiil. Well, if you chose to play a Redguard character, he'll say this.
What are you doing here, Redguard? You a sellsword? A sailor from Stros Mackay?
This quote is in fact a nod to Bethesda's 1998 game, The Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard, where we played as Cyrus, a sellsword sailor from the island of Stros Mackay off the coast of Hammerfell. So, nifty little nod there by Bethesda. Coming in at number 3, the frozen northern holds of Skyrim, specifically Eastmarch and the Pale, are littered with the skeletal remains of many a mammoth. A seemingly endless number of these beasts' bones dot the snowy seas of these regions. But there's one particular mammoth skeleton that isn't like all the others. About where I'm at on the map, in between the wreck of the Orphan's Tear and Sarthal, what at a distance appears to be another pile of bones, upon closer inspection, reveals itself to be a bit more. Because among all this calcium are a couple of spears. Spears, of course, have an interesting relationship with Skyrim. They're not available as weapons in the game, though we know Bethesda did experiment with adding them during the Elder Scrolls V's development. They just ultimately decided not to. As a result, nowhere in the game can spears be found. Except here, obviously. Neither of the pointy sticks is interactable. It's likely their models are just leftover assets from when the devs still hope to add them as equipable items in the game. They bear a heavy Dwemer aesthetic, so perhaps the dwarves were responsible for bringing this beast down. Or maybe it was the snow elves. Regardless of which civilization or race these items once belonged to, this scene eerily seems to suggest that the reason for all the mammoth bones we find in the area is that they were hunted en masse, which is kinda sad. But you know what's even sadder? Finishing spears and not putting them in your game. For a 4th spot, speaking of the dwarves, Calcelmo is an elderly Altmer mage residing in Markarth's Understone Keep. He's known for his fascination with the Lost Dwemer Society, and even has a museum where he collects their ancient artifacts. Among the various items in his possession is something called a Dwemer Puzzle Cube. The game doesn't really do much to explain what this is, and it doesn't have much relevance to Skyrim's plot. Though if the Dragonborn is a member of the Thieves Guild, you'll have the opportunity to steal it as a part of a Radiant quest. However, even then, you still don't learn what exactly this thing is. All we know is that it's probably worth money, and thieves want it for some reason. Alas, while such an item is an object of curiosity to many of us, players of the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind are already very familiar with it, as early in that game's main questline, we'd have to retrieve the Dwemer Puzzle Box from a ruin and deliver it to a well-known researcher in exchange for him to share important information relative to the story with us. In all fairness, we didn't really learn the significance of the cube in Morrowind either. It was just an item some scientist wanted us to fetch for him. However, evidently, sometime over the next few hundred years or so, the box made its way to Skyrim, which is pretty cool. And if you're up for the task, you can once more get your hands on it. Halfway through at number 5, we take a trip away from the mortal world and journey to the Soul Cairn, the afterlife realm where those who have been soul-trapped are doomed to remain in for all of eternity. One of the spookiest locales in the Elder Scrolls V. Here, when wandering the purple-tinted wasteland, one will come across a number of odd characters, mostly hostile. However, we can also happen upon quite a few friendly, or at least neutral souls just hanging out. When interacting with one of the spirits, there's a chance that they may say the following phrase.
Just step into the painting, he said. Yeah, sure. Like it's that simple.
While the quote doesn't at first make too much sense, it's a reference to the quest A Brush with Death from the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. In that mission, the hero of Kvatch would be sent to look for a missing Dunmer painter in the city of Cheydinhal, named Rive Lythandis. Eventually we'd find out that the man was actually trapped inside of one of his paintings. Apparently the artist had a magical brush that allowed him to enter his works of art. But after going inside one of them, he lost the brush, and therefore couldn't leave, trapping himself in a painting, hence why he was missing. It would be the player's job to enter that painting and help Rive find his brush so the two of you could leave. It was really one of the game's strongest side quests. It's unclear if the spirits we encounter in the Cairn were lured into a painting by the same painter we met in Oblivion. I find that unlikely, Rive was a pretty cool guy. Or if perhaps there existed another individual with a similar brush or powers. Whatever the case, I don't think I'll be putting up any artwork in my manor anytime soon. 6th, about manners. The Hearthfire DLC didn't just give us the ability to build new homes, but it also introduced a plethora of new miscellaneous items and consumables. Among them was a drink called Argonian Bloodwine, which increased your poison resistance by 40% and allowed you to breathe underwater for 50 seconds, while slowing stamina regeneration by 30% for 30 seconds. The beverage isn't exactly the most notable. It's not like it's featured prominently in any missions or anything. It's just added into a few new homes. Though the drink actually isn't all that new. The player home expansion, Fighter's Stronghold from Oblivion, was indeed the first time fans of the Elder Scrolls were introduced to Argonian Bloodwine. Its effects were pretty much identical, providing poison resistance and water breathing for 50 seconds, plus some additional disease resistance for the same amount of time. That's about all there is to it. Not much further I can go with this fact, but hey, that's why we call this series Tiny Details. Next, the many bards of Skyrim that can be found across her inns and taverns will play a variety of musical tunes. From simple hymns with their flutes, to singing their hearts out about heroes once named Ragnar the Red. One song they commonly play on lutes is a piece called Square. It's entirely instrumental and contains no vocals at all, but goes a little like this. What you might not know is that the same tune originally debuted as a part of the soundtrack for the first Elder Scrolls game, Arena, where it was used as general background music when the player was inside inns and taverns. It was reused with the same purpose in the next game, Daggerfall. However, we didn't get to hear it again after that. Until now, that is. Bethesda recorded the track again, clearly using more modern methods, and made it a melody playable by Skyrim's bards, who happen to be found most often in our inns and taverns. So a neat little way Elder Scrolls V players can experience a bit of the Elder Scrolls 1 and 2. Coming in at number 8, we head back to the Pale for a little bit of a mystery. At my location on the map, one can happen across 2 tents, perched up seemingly in the middle of nowhere, next to a fire, and overlooking a gorgeous view. One tent will contain nothing but a sleeping bag and a lockbox, but the other will have a human skeleton. What happened here? It would seem these 2 tents once belonged to a couple out on a getaway. That's the only thing that really makes any sense. There's a gorgeous view ahead of them for them to stare off and gawk at, and they don't really seem to have any supplies for a long-term stay. But at some point, something must have gone horribly wrong. One of the people here died in their bed, and the other is just nowhere to be found. My suspicion is that foul play is the culprit here. While the wilderness of the Pale is home to a number of things that can kill you, most of those things are animals, and animals are very messy. This man's skeleton isn't surrounded by any blood or signs of a real struggle, so he likely met his end while he was completely asleep, to someone who was acting carefully and quietly. My suspicion is that this person was killed by their partner while they were out here on this romantic getaway. It all makes sense, the absence of a mess, the absence of one of the person, and if you were going to take care of somebody, you best bring him to a spot far away from your home, where it'll take a while for anyone to find the body, if at all, i.e. in the middle of nowhere. The exact motivations for such an actor aren't so apparent, but I'm willing to bet somewhere out here in the Pale, there is a killer on the loose. Getting close to the end here at number 9, one of Skyrim's more frequent random encounters concerns a witch who can be ran into on the roads, battling against an Antronach. Typically, the Antronach will emerge victorious, but no matter who it is, the winner of this fight will go on to attack the Dragonborn. Defeat them, and then feel free to help yourself to the loot. Though, have you ever wondered what the backstory behind this here scene is? Well, considering hags are built around destruction magic, the same school Antronachs are summoned from, looks would suggest that the Antronach this witch is fighting was probably conjured up by her in the first place. Likely the mage spawned in the creature, but wasn't quite skilled enough to control it, and it turned on her. This is really the only explanation that makes sense, and a conclusion that only took me between 7 and 8 years to come to. But some cool humor on the part of whichever developer thought this whole interaction up. And finally, last on our list, Sheogorath's Daedric quest, The Mind of Madness, will begin when a wood elf beggar by the name of Dervenin in Solitude asks the player journey to the abandoned west wing of Solitude's Blue Palace to find his mysterious master who apparently abandoned him or something, and convince the guy to come back. To get into the wing, Dervenin, for whatever reason, gives us an item called Pelagius' hip bone. At first, none of this makes any sense at all, and it's obvious the Bossmer is a bit crazy, but nonetheless, shortly after gaining access to this portion of the building, we'll be teleported to Sheogorath's Plane of Oblivion, where we learn the Daedric Monarch of Madness was the master Dervenin was referring to, and we'll be forced to complete a number of wacky tasks for the insane prince before he agrees to go back to his wood elf follower. But going back to that hip bone we were given, like so many other objects on this list, Pelagius' hip bone actually made its first appearance in a previous Elder Scrolls game. In Oblivion's Shivering Isles DLC, which took place in Sheogorath's Realm of Oblivion, the pelvis of Pelagius was one of many collectible items we could find for the Museum of Oddities that would put it on display if we were able to acquire it. So, between the events of the Elder Scrolls 4 and the Elder Scrolls 5, Pelagius' pelvis or hip bone made its way from the realms of Oblivion all the way into the hands of this Bossmer beggar named Dervenin. How exactly that happened? Well, that's a story I'd like to hear too sometime. But with that, we are going to wrap up yet another 10 tiny details you may still have missed in the Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim Part 43, my gosh. Thanks for watching, everybody. Which of what we dived into today was your favorite fact? And what Easter eggs, hidden secrets, and tiny details are you aware of that I've yet to tackle? Leave a comment down below. As always, like ratings are very much appreciated. Again, thanks for stopping by, and hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.